Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We have some additional team members here tonight. I'll let them introduce themselves here shortly once Chase gives the presentation of a proper introduction. But this is just a sequence or a follow-up to our sequence on the continuum of services. We had talked about doing a number of work sessions following that conversation. We started last time with HR data and kind of centering the problem, looking also at our CBA and our district SST work. And so this second work session, we wanted to come back and highlight some more mental health supports and initiatives, resources for both staff and students. And so we'll try to keep it to an hour like we're accustomed to, of course, with Ed Committee. And so we won't talk at you the whole hour. We'll try to leave some time for questions and question and answer too. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chase.
Thanks, Matt. As always, Matt did a nice job of framing what we're going to talk about this evening, and like we've done the rest of the series, I'm kind of going to, I think told Matt earlier, MC for lack of a better word, but a lot of the team is going to do most of the talking, and so it'll be a bit of a round robin. And I think that you've probably met or interacted with most of the team around the table, maybe not Emily.
Yeah, I can introduce myself.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Emily Schreff. I am the Healthy Kids Clinic Coordinator, and I'm also going to be taking the lead on mental health as Corrine is transitioning into HR. Or I guess it's already happening. So thanks for letting me join.
So Emily's been a great addition to our team, and you came from an SFA?
Yes,
role,
I was an
is that right?
SFA for 3 years.
Which
Yeah.
building?
Lincoln and Christine Grant. So very different.
So we've been happy to have her here working with Jess Jemerson, and as she said, we're glad to have her at the table because she's going to take on some of the responsibilities that Corrine is passing along. And of course, you've met and worked with Corrine. You saw Allison as late as last week, and then Ashley and everybody else, and then Nick. So I think that's who is going to help us do the presenting tonight, and then I'll jump in a little bit as well. And as Matt said, we'll try to keep this brief so we can get to the discussion part of it. And we have 3 different parts we want to talk about tonight. An overview of our SEBH work, connections back to our mental health work group from a few years ago, some of the ongoing supports and initiatives we have in place both for students and staff, and then some of the future initiatives and things that are already in development that we're thinking about for this year and into the future. And so that's kind of a roadmap for this evening, and of course, hopefully some robust discussion. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Allison.
Thank you. All right.
Like display, all of my speaker notes are not available at the moment.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're excited to just be here today with you, and a lot of what I share here initially won't be any new information. This is just a review. It's my understanding that you all had a chance to review this visual, not the last meeting, but maybe our October meeting as part of the MTSS overview. And so we're just putting this in front of you again. This is sort of our district goals when it comes to SEBH for MTSS. So what does it look like? We obviously want to center everything that we're doing within that tier 1 or universal level. And so when we're talking about our mental health efforts, I always bring it back to what are we doing for all students and how are we providing skill instruction, support, relationship building, student and staff wellness efforts for all throughout the district. Thinking about how we're setting up our classroom environments, creating safe, supportive, collaborative spaces. And there's a few terms defined over on the right-hand side. But again, just wanted to make sure that we have this kind of centering our conversation. Really, when we prioritize and promote, as you all know, social, emotional, behavioral health, we see those academic outcomes increase as well, and students be able to achieve their academic potentials as well. So going on to the next slide, just bringing back in front of everyone again, MTSS visual. So even as recent as this afternoon, our building administrators and leadership teams were in. We were talking about ESSA and then determining, some data sets for our self-assessment of multi-tiered systems, or our SAMI, which we'll be engaging in soon. And so when we think about those 5 components of MTSS, that leadership, infrastructure, universal, supplemental and intensive, or we refer to it usually targeted and intensive tiers, and then that database decision making, When we think of that on the SCPH side, it's exactly the same as academic, and sometimes that's just a misunderstanding, so to clarify those components as well. And then finally, we just work our way through the continuous improvement process. I've been in this role for 8 years, had a variety of different team members engaged in the same work, and so we're always just assessing where we are, what our current needs are, how to set goals, monitor our work, and then use data to drive our decision-making forward.
Okay, so I'm going to take over for a little bit. We thought it was important to circle back to some of the work that we did a couple of years ago around the mental health work group as we talked about where we are now, just to help set some of that historical stage. So this slide and the next slide just harken back to that. It is what we talked about, I think I was in front of you 2 years ago, to kind of do the last overview of what we learned. So this is kind of what we did, and then the next slide is some of those recommendations that came out of that team, and then also of the surveying we did of our overall school community. It's not the only thing, obviously, driving this work forward, but it is one of kind of the things we're weaving through, right? We've gathered some feedback. We're at another point where we're reviewing and thinking about some of those next steps. So important to kind of draw those parallels and connect the dots on a few things. So then, what are some of the things we have going on? This first one is big, right? Because how we talk to and who we talk to and how do we get information out to everybody is kind of the starting place. So we highlighted just a couple key communication strategies that are centered in some of this mental health and wellness. Am I okay?
I think we're not okay. You're okay. I think we just got lost.
Oh,
You're fine.
okay.
You're good.
Do you want to regroup on something before I keep going?
We were just discussing if you touched on the last slide
I
there.
thought we missed a slide, but, oh,
But
no,
you
I
did.
talked about it.
You did.
Yeah.
That's
my bad.
Yeah, that's why I
Sorry.
said we just weren't okay.
He's saying we. All right, everybody else okay? You are okay.
Start over.
Okay, so we had some, let's keep talking about communication because clearly this is super important. Okay, so a couple of things that we feel like are pretty broad, right? One is the QR code, which Eliza mentioned in jest, but is really important. So all student ID, secondary student ID badges and staff ID badges have a link to that support site. Much of our communication, pretty much anything Kristen pushes out that has to do with mental health and wellness connected to the second bullet includes a link back to that. She and I have worked together on a couple key community messages that we send out at some different points in time across the year just to continue to promote those reminders. So not waiting for something to happen, but getting in front of. Sometimes we know it's important to share that information widely. Typically those messages go secondary students, families, and staff, correct? And then finally, securely, the system that when there's some concern about anything on devices for students, a notification system, it's kind of on the flip side, right? A little bit more of a response, but also important communication so we can get in front of talking to kids, talking to families, and having some support around anything that's going on concerning there. Okay, we're all good. Keep going here. Mental health personnel, so another thing that we've worked over the years to just continue to bolster and support. So we have our school counselors, and they have access to lots of resources and support. We've continued to have a robust school counseling program, which I'm really proud of and we should all be really proud of. Combined with increasing the use of our nurses and our FTE for our nurses, so really building up those positions to be leaders in mental health. And then the third of that kind of trio of support at all the buildings would be the Student Family Advocate Program. And that role has some flexibility to kind of evolve to meet changing needs, where the counseling and the nurse program have a little bit, some things that have to happen, right, as part of the school day every day. The SFAs are able to kind of shift and move to meet those changing needs. This year or I guess it was the end of last year, we added a district-wide Spanish-speaking SFA. Who's able to kind of meet with the based SFA to extend the reach to some of our families who weren't as comfortable coming to school or had some of those language barriers in terms of access. So that's kind of a trial, but it's been fairly successful so far this year. And then some of those key partners. Okay, yep, let me stay here for a minute. Yeah. Key partners, school-based psychiatry, DBT in schools, the University of Iowa partnerships, our therapy services we have on site at secondary, 4 Oaks and ChildServe, community who comes out regularly, especially if we have potentially suicidal staff or students, as well as United Action for Youth for some crisis. And then Care Solace has been kind of a really unique addition to that. So it's a platform, we've talked about it before, right? Students, community members, and staff all have the ability to jump on and search for a provider if they need somebody. And then our staff can also do a direct referral. So it helps kind of find a provider that matches those student and family needs. All right, I'm going to turn it back to Allison.
So some instructional resources, and again, Eliza would have spoken to this the last couple of board meetings, but our SEL skill instruction and support, we're really trying to enhance this across the board in all of our elementary and secondary spaces. And so sort of a gift out of COVID came our instructional minute allotment for that daily morning meeting at the elementary level. We're really excited about our teachers utilizing that time to set up their classroom community for the day. We do have SCBH priority standards in our K-5 spaces as well. Students at the elementary level have access to weekly classroom counseling at each grade level, which is also a wonderful addition, and we're seeing our counselors collaborate more and more so with our grade level teachers and collaborative teams on how to extend the reach there as well, and have some extension in their morning meeting that's either post or follow up to some of that classroom lesson from the counselor. And then we also have at our secondary level weekly advisory lessons, and that is a mix of some district provided as well as some building developed advisory lessons that are tied back to SEL skill building and increasing the confidence and competence when it comes to students and staff really on those SEL competencies. And then if you think back to the visual that Eliza shared last week on the layered triangle, right? So the green extended all the way through. As we think about layering on supports, so all of the universal instruction is still accessible to all students, but as we identify students who may need additional support, then we think about a menu of options when it comes to intervention. So we think about something as simple as a 2x10, where we have a staff member checking in with a student just a couple minutes a day for 10 days in a row. We usually see really favorable response to that strategy. Check in, check out, just a low-level intervention. Eliza shared again about this last week, but that's just a opportunity for increased access for students to have positive acknowledgement and really like specific behavior feedback. And then we move on to skill instruction groups, where students have access to a 20 to 30 minute session weekly for about 6 weeks, targeted to any specific skills, so perhaps executive functioning, pro-social skills, etc. Check and Connect is a little more robust, kind of like a tier 2+ intervention that's got a mentoring component to it and the use of a lot of data. So we go through and look typically at students' grades, attendance, interactions with peers. We'll use the SEL screening data, a variety of other data sets there. And then students at the secondary level also have access to some of the behavioral health studies course that we referenced last week as well. And then we did talk a little bit about the student survey last year, but this is something that we're really proud of. Universal screening is, of course, best practice when it comes to MTSS. And over the years, we've really felt very strongly about the use of a universal screening tool. And then we continue to grow in the area of responsiveness to the data. So we have the survey questions linked in. That's tied to the district website so that all parents and families have access to review the survey questions. As I mentioned last week, we gather consent to participate during the registration process. And you can see some of the categories that we gather feedback in. There's anywhere from about 9 to 12 total topic areas. And then we have sessions with both our elementary and secondary on the data analysis component. And this is where it really gets exciting because we're able to, within Panorama, disaggregate the data in a variety of different ways and really dig in, look at grade level, look at student race, look at gender, look at a variety of different factors. In both the elementary, this was the first screen that we used the Panorama tool. Previously, we used MySavers at the elementary level. We've now had 8 administrations at the secondary level. And we have had continued celebrations in the area of supportive relationships, which is really exciting. We're up into the high 80s, low 90% favorable responses. So that's an incredible celebration for our district. The questions in that category are basically, I have an adult in the building that I can go to for support, and I have a peer in the building that I can go to for support. And then areas for growth that come out of our survey data are in the areas of engagement, both at the secondary and elementary levels. And that lines up really well with our HRS work, specifically around instructional strategies and the MESOT framework as well. So one thing that we always try to reiterate with our student survey data is that this is a way to capture student voice and perspective. And again, we really encourage our building teams to circle back to what are we doing universally. So we're seeing some trend data and how can we better utilize our morning meeting time and eventually get to the point where we're just embedding some of the skill instruction all throughout the day, embedding that within our academic areas. So we're very excited again about that Panorama student survey experience and the data that it provides.
You know our participation rate.
Yeah, our participation rate is amazing. The secondary participation rate is high 90s. The elementary. The secondary is low 80s across the board. Our middle schools knock it out of the park at the secondary level. It's a little harder for us to increase those numbers at the high school level just because some students are not present when it's being taken. But our building teams are really working harder each time to circle back to any students who may have missed that opportunity. Our elementaries, they want to make sure every single student completes it in grades 3-5, and so they work really hard at that
The
as well.
admin are very competitive.
They are very competitive.
100%.
I do share out the response rates, mid-window to make sure that I give them a little oomph to get going on that. But they work really hard at it. It's not a small lift. It's a big lift at the building level. And so while the facilitation of it and like the administration from the student end is pretty simple, it takes time and logistics to get it put together. So.
And just a reminder, the reason it's not a higher percentage is because parents have to give
Correct.
permission. So
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah,
Allison has kind of underplayed it. I think one of the biggest kudos on this slide is that it says ongoing initiatives. If the board members, after 496 came out, that's when some of the attacks on some of the social emotional learning that we were doing came from the state. And so we really had to rethink our approach to this, and Allison and the team have done a fantastic job, as the statistics that the team just shared show. Not every district continues to lean into this, but we've continued to prioritize it, and I think the information that Allison is sharing is a credit to the work that she's done and the leadership we provided around continuing to prioritize this and trying to say, okay, here's the rules the state's going to put on us. We're going to continue to make it a priority and work within those to get this information from our students and turn it back to use at our buildings for their support.
And I think I shared last week, we have I think at the elementary level, it's about a 95% consent rate, and at secondary, maybe like a high 80s. So it's strong. And many of those are just missing, and so they're default no rather than saying
Because they
no.
have to opt in.
Correct, they have to opt in, right.
And Chase, if I remember right, that's the main state intervention, right, is requiring parental consent?
Yes. And we've embedded it into our Infinite Campus, to our enrollment process each spring to help try to expedite and make that more efficient and more easily accessible for our parents as they do that. Ashley.
Okay, so Allison kind of spoke to some of the universal and tier 2 supports, and then on the other end of the continuum, when we think about mental health for our more complex students and our students with IEPs, one thing we've done as a district is really enhance our levels of support for building teams, and we've identified kind of 3 models in which we can respond to buildings when they're engaging in problem solving. The first is around consultation services. So this is a district level team just providing some guidance from afar, if you will. So reviewing a student's current plan, providing some alternate ideas or strategies. The quick care services are intended to be interactive and brief support to building teams. So this is when teams have a pretty solid plan for student services, but might need some coaching or skill development in how to implement those plans. And then complex direct support is our most intensive service model. So that's when our district response team is heavily involved and is really maintains ownership of the student support and services. And then once we've brought the temperature down, if you will, we then look for ways to bring that back to the school team. So these are the different ways that we've built out our current problem-solving processes and supports. And then if you go to the next slide, Chase.
I think it goes to me then. You're handed off to me?
I suppose.
Sorry.
This is a little bit different order than what I sorry.
Sorry. So the staff feedback, I think we're going to kind of bounce a little bit here. So some of the staff feedback pieces, so things we'll highlight and then we'll come back to some of the stuff for Ashley is related to the, we've collected the HRS level 1 survey and you've seen some of that data over time. Probably the next 3 things are some of the things that are kind of upcoming or in place now that have had some exciting kind of work going forward. Really positive responses to as well, looking at this enhanced communication with staff following. It's been some great work. I have to give credit where credit is due. Lindsay Detra following up with a lot of these situations, and then Corrine over there has done a great job. We had a particularly difficult day with a friend at one of our elementary schools the other day, and Corrine then went over there to check in with those employees, went over there, spent some time with them, and I think some of that has just really made some nice improvements and just the follow-up that we've been trying to get in place. Our folks are doing a great job reporting when these things are coming up now, so we have plenty of opportunities to follow up with staff members and working through that, and it's been a really nice way to interact and let people know that they're being supported, they're being cared for, and I think there's been some positive responses. And then also shout out to Corrine on these next 2 pieces related to is she's joined us in that employee relations piece. We've been talking for a while with the board about the importance of getting these exit surveys and stay surveys up and running. So as of today, we shared some of the offboarding procedures with our administrators related to what we expect when the employee is kind of leaving the district and what that looks like for everything from what their notification is all the way through an opportunity for them to provide some feedback. And then here in December, I think it's the first week in December, we'll be sending out our first round of stay surveys where about 25% roughly, I think is what we're shooting for, of each employee group will get a survey asking and sharing like, hey, what are some things that we might hear from the people who are in the district and want to continue to be here, and what can continue to make their experience even better. So we're really excited about seeing that results. We're not doing those anonymously. We're actually intentionally doing those where people's names would be attached, so that way we could follow up with an employee if need be. I think that's an important part. That's one of the parts that we thought of as, from a data perspective, that we thought would be really helpful in getting really accurate loops. We're going to send out communication ahead of time, asking for honest feedback, so that way we can best utilize it moving forward. The next slide kind of gets into just some of the supports and some of the training that we have in place for our employees. I'm really proud of some of the work that we've done related to our employee assistance program. If some of you who have past experience with the district, it was really an afterthought. What we have now in place with the Covenant Workplace Solutions is a high quality program for our staff. I know personally when I recommend that to someone or I tell them it's an option, I feel good about doing that, and that is going to be something that could be beneficial for them, where someone's getting up to 8 free sessions. They're getting unlimited access to a variety of resources within it. And then the other thing is our employee assistance program actually isn't overly utilized, because also our benefits in general related to mental health are spectacular. Some of the things where people are able to get care out on their own without even going through the EAP is very valuable to our staff members. A lot of times when we are having some of these conversations, Brady and I will be working with an employee there, it's not uncommon that they're already working with someone and that they're benefiting from our insurance and what that provides. So that's something I think it's a little known fact. It's not something we're probably throwing out there a lot, but for many families, many individuals, it's a key benefit for our staff that I think is very helpful in relationship to kind of our topic tonight. And then also you'll see those next few bullets. I'm not going to go through those in great detail, but we have a number of trainings that we go in place to help make sure our staff's prepared for a variety of situations, whether it's violence, a crisis, or unfortunate event in the building, just making sure that we're taking care of the preparation so that way they feel supported in some of those high-stress situations as well. Now I think I get to hand it back to Ashley. There you go.
So the previous slide I had shared really talked about the way in which we show up for our school teams, specifically the adults. So how are we providing those supports and services for our students who are struggling through that lens of adult support and training. This slide talks a lot about then the shift we've had in the last couple of years with our staff, but then in direct service of our students, from this concept of challenging behavior or mental health. We've really been focusing with our teams on this concept of both and. So very rarely is it one or the other. And one thing I'm really proud of is in the last 2 years, we've implemented several new interventions that target that area of SEL learning, but also specifically mental health. So 3 years ago, the only intervention that the district had implemented with Fidelity was dialectical behavior therapy, which is that behavioral health studies that Allison referred to earlier. That's a full continuum, so there's a course, but then there's also interventions all the way up to specially designed instruction. We now have implemented several other interventions and strategies and trained staff in those strategies to have a more robust toolbox for responding to students who are experiencing challenging behavioral and mental health. So these are all tier 3 supports we're providing. In addition to that, in the last couple of years, we've begun to explore having direct service provision in the IEP by a licensed therapist. So that's all continued work that we've been building out in an effort to target what we see to be a more complex need emerging in our system. With that being said, part of why we're here is we recognize there's a lot of work to do still. So specifically in that kind of tier 3 umbrella, our most intensive needs, some of the work that we're still really focused on building out or recognize that there's additional work to do is that idea of ensuring our IEP services match each student's level of need. We've talked to you a little bit about that and brought some data to you around where there's some disparity in the utilization of our service delivery model based on student needs. We also continue to, as we do that work, support teachers in how do you document that in the IEP. So how do we make sure, again, that those IEPs match the needs of the students, and then make sure there's that alignment between the goals and services and data. So part of that is providing our educators with more data sets and tools to be able to use to inform their IEP development. And then really the heart of the work that we continue to engage in and want to devote additional energy and time towards is that professional learning. So again, providing learning on how do you match the IEP to the student need, how do you provide effective instruction based on student need, and then how do you create kind of that student roadmap, if you will, and how do you use that to inform your practices in a continuous way.
So I'm going to jump in. While I don't do a lot of it at the current, I asked Nick to let me talk a little bit about the HR side because I can't let it go completely and I love it. And we talked a lot about the things that are going on and actually kind of turned the page for us to some of the developing and future initiatives. And one of the things that we know is important and that we believe that we need to lean into a little bit more is what are those supports that we can make more public and provide for our staff. And we've got a group together, a lot of the people around this table that have been working on this, and how do we step into this? And we've considered things from just a webinar to kind of a one and done to even having a mental health fair here at the building for staff, kind of reminiscent of the general health fair that Kristen's team used to put on. And we are looking at a more robust long-term approach. But as we look at next spring, we've kind of come up with this upcoming speaker and topic series to kind of lean into it a little bit more. Taking advantage of some of the time that we know that our teachers have as we've kind of cheeky and lovingly entitled their Choose Their Own Adventure days to provide some opportunities of if this mental health piece is something that's very important to them, they'd have resources they could explore. Not only have it available live during that time, but also to create these in recording so they could go back and then access at a different time and looking at it from a number of different lenses. And so we look at putting this series together over a course of 3 months, one segment each of the 3 months in the spring as a precursor to a more robust ongoing program as we go into next year. One of the conversations that we had as we looked at, do we do a live event where people can come here to the building? We weren't really ready for that for a number of different reasons, but one is we know that mental health while important, is still really personal to folks, and we weren't sure how employees would feel if they had to walk into a room with their colleagues where they're basically saying, I want more information on mental health. We don't want it to have the opposite effect of really what we're trying to accomplish. And so we believe by having more of these virtual sessions, as well as a starting point at least, it'll give us a better idea of where we are as we can continue to build out those resources. And again, as the team has talked about, we have a number of resources that are in place, but we believe we can do more and communicate more about those resources that are available. And we feel this is a great way to do that and to keep it connected to HRS and some of our other instructional initiatives that we have going. Along with that, Andrew Finstemaker came and talked to the board, I think, once at Southeast last school year, and then already again this year, about some of the work we're doing around AI. One of the initiatives we're launching here yet this winter are some interactive sessions, learning sessions for students on AI. And as we've talked about, it's not just teaching them about using AI, it's about how to properly use AI. And we know there's a mental health piece in there. There's been a number of studies that have come out recently about how individuals, both adults and students, are using AI and the personal searches they're doing with that. And so we believe it's important to teach our students about, as it says, how you interact, what are those perils, and what are the learning targets we want our students to achieve through the use of AI. And so it's something our team's working on. We don't have a date set.
It'll be after the first of the year. One of the things that we met earlier this week to talk through what those lessons will look like, and it's scary but unfortunate, or scary and unfortunate, kind of differentiating between human-to-human relationships and what those look like compared to an AI interaction. So we want to be very strategic with how we phrase that with our kids and with our staff, so we can appropriately communicate. Like, it's not an AI like relationship, like it's an interaction. So we want to be very careful with how we differentiate between that, because we know some of those interactions become increasingly unhealthy with our kids.
So an important piece that we want to make sure that we get in front of our students here yet this winter. And then lastly, before we open it up to more questions and discussion, it's really taking it back to where we began in a slightly different context. Kareen talked about that community work group that we put together, and through some conversations, the same team, we have pulled together what we would call some mental health advisory group. Not to be confused with the advisory committee, right, that we talked about in board. That's not what it is. It's a group of advisors from the community to help the administration as we think through this. We had a meeting several months ago and came back and decided that we would bring that group together at least probably 3 times a year, just to make sure that we're staying in tune with some of the things that they're hearing in the community, what they see is what maybe our needs are, for us to bounce the ideas off of them that we have. And so it's an informal group that we've put together of some individuals that you would probably recognize the names, so folks that have been strong advocates as well as collaborators with us in the past, to help us just think through this important piece and to keep that connection to the broader community as we do this work. And then also hopefully to keep those lines of communication open with these key communicators, so it's not as something comes up. There is a constant touch point that they can come back, so we can stay on the same page as we do some of this work. And so it's still in process and will continue to be fully developed out. Again, it's not what we had, because the work group had a specific purpose and you saw those objectives. So it's a different iteration of that with a different purpose. And so we will continue to be flexible in how we use that group and how we meet with that group as we collaborate with them and the work that we do on the administrative side. So that is a rather quick kind of walk through some of the work that we've been doing, what we're doing, and what we hope to develop here in the next several months. And we look forward to answering questions and having some discussion with you all.
Thanks, Chase, and everyone. This is a great presentation. I actually learned a lot from it, which says a good deal about me, not about you. 3 things I wanted to say. One, I noticed there was a couple of references to threat assessment teams. I think several months ago, when we were talking about assessment teams, we were using the term care assessment teams. And I just wondered if we're going away from that. I think that's kind of important in the community because I've heard community members say that if they hear the word threat assessment, they think about we're re-employing officers in the community, in the schools. And that is not, I don't think that's happening, but that's what that term means to them. The other one, really glad to see the stay and exit interviews. That is a topic that comes up at almost every Black Voices Project meeting in one form or another. And the members of that group are very much interested in what we're experiencing in terms of why people are deciding not to stay, not to exit, and why are people deciding to stay. So I'm really glad to see that. The last thing is more general. We recently had a lot of discussion here in the boardroom and from the community members and in the community about a teacher who was experiencing physical violence from a student. In that whole deliberation or conversational process, I kept thinking somehow the community is not getting, or this group from the community is not getting what we're hearing here today and what you're actually doing, what is happening in the district in terms of addressing the students that are having difficulty in their school. So and I've asked this before, I wonder if there's some way we can get Kristen Peterson images of students having a great time in the district as to somehow get that kind of a publicity informational tool that does reflect what all these elements in these programs that you're describing in a positive light and in a readily understandable light. I know this is not easy to convey to community members, sometimes even to teachers, in a way that they understand and can reiterate. But to me, that would be a worthwhile undertaking, as well as the elements that you're committed to working on in the near future here. If I'm on the wrong track there, just tell me, I can't do that, I'm not going to do that. And I'll try to remember.
We'll start with your first one, Charlie. How about that? And we'll come back to the last one. Is that all right? And Chase, talk a little bit about the threat/care piece.
So Laura Cottrell has started partnering with Kate Callahan on our threat assessment work. And Matt and I were just sidebarring. I thought that Laura had maybe talked about this at a board presentation earlier in the fall. But either way, it's clearly something we need to come back and circle back to. But one of the pieces is that they have really started leaning into the foundational work behind that, which is a process called CSTAG. And part of that is to be very direct and use common vernacular about what we're talking about. And so Laura and Kate came to us and said, we understand that you've been utilizing care assessment. It creates confusion about why the process is used and how we work through that. And they wanted to make sure that we stayed more true to that model. And so they came back to us with the idea they wanted to go back to calling it threat assessment. You're correct that I think there is some community sentiment that means that the police are going to be involved. We have not changed that, where we're employing police in the school system, SROs or anything like that. But depending on the severity of the threat, there are times when we have to contact the police. And so we're not going to sit here and say that there is never police information on that. But the idea of going to threat assessment is it's more in line with the methodology and the research-based strategies that we're using. UAY continues to be our main partner on this work. They provide the mental health evaluation if one is called for. They sit on that threat assessment team that makes the recommendation along with building leaders and district leaders when we get to that decision point. But it was something that we didn't take lightly, and I appreciate that feedback, Charlie, because it just shows or signals to us that we need to provide some more education around that, so the community feels more comfortable with us using that terminology, and that, quite honestly, it's not a change in the process. It's probably more of a clarification, and really allows folks to know that we are taking what are serious behaviors in some circumstances very seriously, and running them through a community-informed and partnered relationship as we try to continue to do what's best for students. Not only the student that's at the heart of that review, but all the students that could potentially be impacted by the situation that's taking place.
Thanks, that really helps.
Next, I said one of the, I was going
Go
to
ahead.
connect it to one of their pieces that you talked about, and I think that in the series is that we do have it slated to come back with some additional information around the CBA later on, and so we can wrap this part about the threat assessment. You can couple that with that, Charlie, to come back and tie those closer together, so we can provide some additional information and clarity on that when we come back and talk about some of the changes in CBA as well.
And I wonder if preemptively, might be, if it's possible, it might be helpful to contact VPP leadership.
Okay.
And tell them, you know, this is what's up.
Sure. Okay.
Could definitely do that. And then, just to address your last kind of point or question there, Director Easton, about communication strategies, you know, we pulled it out a few things we've tried to do, but I think you're right. I mean, there's always more things we can continue to try to share out that are available for staff, or that supports the experience that is more regular for, you know, students that that we're serving in the district, and for our staff members. So I think we're constantly looking for those things, and trying to share the good news, and also the resources that people have available to them. That's a constant one for us, and I think we've made some good improvements on there. I know, was it KCRG we saw this morning that was running a story on our work session here tonight? They highlighted one of that first bullet point on the communication strategy side with the QR codes on the back of our badges. So any kind of coverage we can get that way to just share out to people. I mean, that's just one more thing, right? But there's some examples of that I think we can continue to do. So Kristen's always got great ideas on that, so, yeah.
And I would circle back also, one of our ed committee meetings, maybe a year and a half ago, we talked about PBIS or SEBH focused video, and I know Kristen and her team have been creating some really amazing videos for the community. So always in the back of our mind, and a project that, you know, is something that we would like to pull off at some point as well.
This is such awesome work that you're doing, and you know, as we can show the community what you're doing, that really helps, I think, with the community's understanding of incidents that come up, you know, that get a lot of publicity and are not representative of where students are in their daily classroom activities.
Well, and I always think it's hard to talk about the challenges if we don't understand the baseline, right? I mean, like, are we really talking about the appropriate problem or challenge if we don't understand the things that have been tried or the things that have been employed? So, exactly. Sorry, Director Finch, I know you were going to say something.
The individual counseling sessions, how are students identified for that? Is that strictly an IEP process, or do we have, is there another structured way that we identify students for that? And how many counseling sessions do they receive, and who's coming in? Is it primarily, who are the partners that are primarily coming in to do those sessions?
So the two partners we primarily have most recently, Four Oaks and ChildServe. And those services are kind of with the whole idea of MTSS, right? Like, we're trying all the things. When we added Care Solace, we're also trying to do that referral initially so that everybody has access. And then working through if there's barriers, if families aren't able to access, if it's a financial piece, if it's a scheduling piece, if it is behavior that are really isolated to the school setting, kind of those ideas. Then looking towards, do we need to use these? I mean, it's a kind of a precious commodity, these school-based services, because we don't have extensive resources there. But with the addition of Care Solace and the partners, I mean, we have a lot of therapy resources in the area. Getting a therapist to come on site for a billable service can be challenging too, so it's kind of that balance. So it's really working through the MTSS system, brainstorming typically with the SFA, sometimes the school counselor as well, to figure out what the needs are, where are the barriers to those access points, and then utilizing those school-based services if we've kind of exhausted all other resources. It usually amounts to a couple hundred kids a year that get some service, and a couple years ago we shifted towards secondary as primary, our primary access point for those school-based services for a couple reasons. One, they're really isolated, right? So parents aren't typically regularly involved in those sessions because they're happening at school. So you don't get that where you're coming and going and meeting the therapist and having that consultation as a parent as part of your visit. It has to happen over email or sometimes a phone call. So students who can really participate independently is important. And the supervision piece too, right? So if you have a kid who needs to go to therapy during the course of the day, it's a kid who is younger, doesn't understand it, isn't really excited about participating, there can be a whole, Molly's nodding her head, it's like we've done this work together. There can be a whole lot of things that happen in the course of that transition that actually make it more detrimental to the therapy happening at school than maybe in a community setting. So it's a fairly small number. It's pretty isolated to circumstances where we've exhausted every other option. But to Ashley's point, we're always looking for new and different ways to do that. So I imagine as Emily comes on, as Ashley's team continues to work on it, we'll explore new options and maybe some additional ways we can access services.
So I'm going to ask this question specifically because it came from a constituent. So,
Sure.
And their question was, has the district thought about employing their own counselor rather than having consultants or agencies come in?
I mean, Matt and I talked about it a couple of times.
Yep, several times, yeah.
I think there's benefits and drawbacks. I mean, that's what I would say in this space, right? One of the reasons I think I've pushed to be hesitant personally is that we don't have a supervision structure for it. So within a clinical setting, right, you have therapists who have clinical supervisors who are regularly consulting on the work that they're doing. And when you're an independently licensed therapist, you are also working with a group of typically peers to review and make case consultation and decisions about practice. So that's always been my hesitancy, is that we don't have a structure for that within the district. I also worry about taking on all of the other things that the community provides within the school. And when we're not in session, when we're not here for the summer, how do we ensure those access points? So that's what I would say my 2 cents on, but I don't know, Matt, if there's anything you want to add based on some of the conversations we've had.
No, you did a nice job of summarizing and been consistent about it. I think there's enough concerns there. And also just kind of thinking about the network of resources that are available, right? And then where would our space be in that, and knowing, you try to think about the mission of our organization, and while we want to, of course, be a partner in mental health, I think I would also have some hesitancy to say we're going to be able to fully address that, our full suite of those services, right? So not only the liability or leadership structure it would take to supervise and effectively manage that, also, knowing I'm not sure even if we tried, we'd have the capacity to do a sufficient work or sufficient job there, and then that kind of creates some discontent or misleading, folks about what we're able to do or provide. So we revisit it every once in a while because we get those same questions and make sure that, the playing field hasn't changed, that there's nothing new we should be considering, but it's one that we get frequently too.
Makes sense.
I have a couple comments and questions. First of all, like Charlie, I want to say thank you for this presentation. Obviously, a lot of people put time into it, and so thank you all. I learned a lot. It's great. I wanted to know, the slides on Board Doc, well, it's not Board Docs anymore, but I was following along the slides. They're in a different order
Yeah, they are.
than
Yeah.
the presentation.
Yeah.
And so maybe whoever has the presentation, we could swap that out
Yep.
so that if community members want to follow along, it will make better sense. The content was all the same, it's just in a different order. Carousel, I've just heard really great things about it. There was actually a robust conversation on one of the mom Facebook groups maybe a month ago, and they were talking at somebody, asked, what is it, does it work? And several people commented really positive things, that they really liked working with the case manager and filled a gap that didn't exist, and it helped them connect to where they wanted to go. So I just wanted to give that feedback that
That's wonderful.
yeah,
Thank you
that's
for sharing.
Good.
yeah, it's really going well. And the mental health webinars are great, and I'm really happy to hear that you're going to archive them the comfort level is one issue, but also, right, mental health is kind of a, you know, you may be okay today, and then 6 months later, you're in, you would need that resource. And so I don't know if we have an employee portal or where they live, but I think that's really a great idea to keep them so that staff can go and access them. My 3 questions are securely, do we feel good that the algorithm is working for the student devices that we're kind of capturing, concerning? Because it's nice to have, but I always wonder, like, are we capturing problems when they exist, or does the algorithm not work? So I'm wondering, or do we see reports generated from that? And then second question is, are we giving parents access at the secondary level, access to the survey data for the emotional social screener? I know when we were using MySavers for the elementary kids, I'd go to a parent-teacher conference and get my MySavers report and see how they responded. Do we give parents that feedback now that we've moved? Only if there's a problem? Like, it sounds like we're looking at the data, which is great, but it was always nice to know as a parent how my student feels about, do they have relationships in the building, and do they have peers that they can connect with? And then my last question was also about the threat assessment teams. I remember when we first stood this up, the concept was kind of like a central team located at the district, and it looks now like we're going to a building-based model. Do we have those threat assessment teams in all of our secondary buildings? Do we have a separate kind of team formed for each of those?
Sure, so we'll start there and then
Backwards
we'll
on
go
these.
backwards.
Yep.
And then, so the answer is yes, we have the teams in the buildings, but we also have a centralized team. And when we come back at a later session, we can go through our flow chart of how we evaluate the threats, and then kind of lay out for the board and the community which team is involved at what level. So we do have a building-based team, but then we also have a district-level team for the more severe threats that come to us. That's a lot of the work that we've been doing over the summer with the teams, is to make sure that it actually is a team approach. It's not, for example, me calling Lucas, and then Lucas calling Brady, and then Brady calling, that they're getting around the table and having those conversations, back to truly embracing that CSTAG approach of threat assessment, to make sure that all those voices are in that conversation at the same time. And that's been a lot of the work that Laura and Kate have been doing, both with the building-based teams and then also as our district level team, bringing in UAY and others as necessary to have those discussions.
I can speak to the second question. I don't want to jump in if you had any other follow-up questions.
that's
Okay. So the question about, are the survey responses accessible to parents and families? The answer is yes. The timeline looked a little funky this fall because we wanted to try it at the elementary level 3-5. Our sample size is much, much smaller, right? And our parents and families are used to having access to the MySavers results. Also, one thing that we learned was sometimes without an accompanying definition of what they were looking at, it almost created more alarm than just baseline, right? And so we did a lot of work at the elementary level to kind of roll that out. Parents and families can go onto their Infinite Campus actually and access by question each of the responses for their child. We put out like a statement within each of the school newsletters for how to access that, et cetera. Because we started with the elementary and wanted to see what it looked like and that everything was going smoothly, the timeline for sharing at the secondary level would have seemed kind of out of nowhere. So what we decided, I had a lengthy conversation with Lucas about this, was that we would prep this for the spring administration and kind of walk our secondary families through how to access that data. Obviously, if any student is identified with significant need or potential risk, the way that Panorama, it's a strength-based, which I really appreciate, right? But there are still opportunities to show no strengths or minimal strengths. So if a student is identified through the MTSS team, that is an area of concern alongside other data sets, then obviously we work through that same process with those individual students as part of our SST team.
And Allison, when we met last week, one of the things we talked through, like when a parent gets the results and if they have questions, we want to make sure that our school-based staff know how to answer those questions until we properly prepare for them for the types of questions that come up, because a parent could say, well, what types of supports are in place in the building? We don't want them to say, well, good question, let me get back to you. So we want to make sure we prepare our administrators, our counselors, any of our other support staff, SFAs, any one of those positions with the answers that families are going to likely have.
To answer your first question around Securely's, we do have access to the reports and feel like it's picking up. Why are you laughing?
I'm just saying, I think it's
Yeah.
working.
It's a hard one to
We get,
Like, we're getting too many reports.
I wouldn't
No.
say we're getting the reports. The nice thing is that anytime any sort of activity that would indicate that we need to intervene and support a student, Lucas and I also get those. So then I'm able to, so it goes to whoever the student is, it goes to the school counselor, it goes to the student family advocate, it goes to the building principal, and it goes to us. And so then we're able to follow back up and see what any kind of support is needed. One thing that we just learned, Lucas and I learned yesterday that started this year, was Securely is also monitoring AI. And so it monitors if students are getting in ChatGPT and asking it things as well. And so we did actually just identify a student that was asking some questions about their mental health and what they should do. So we were able to intervene and connect with the families on that. Those ones that are really concerning contact us 24 hours a day. And so we've got our principals that are then connecting with the families on the weekends or in the evenings if they're alarming. And then there's a series of steps that Securely will go to if they see something more concerning, that it will alarm us. It'll call event at that point. They'll call the family, they'll call us, they'll call Kate just to make sure that somebody's following up with them.
And just kind of
It's
what
really good.
Liza had mentioned, like being part of that entire kind of email group, we're able to see what the functioning of those teams are. I mean, it's
They're
crazy
on
just
it.
how quick it is.
They're on
Like I got it, I mean, just the amount of staff members that are ready to react and respond to that. And as Eliza said, we get some calls late in the evening on a Saturday night, Friday night, and teams are on it. So,
They're usually like, just want to let you know I'm on it. I've talked to mom or dad. We're doing this. The kids set up. Or like if a child clicks on the 988, which is on their computers or something, it will let us know that somebody's clicked on 988. So usually we'll follow up and they'll say, oh, I didn't even know it was 988. Okay, great. You know, I'd rather that be, but making sure that they know that there is something else besides that resource that they can.
the most entertaining time to get these is when students just start at like a health class and they're looking up stuff for a class assignment. And the number of responses like, oh, false alarm, they're looking up something for a class project. And it's
Or
just-
science projects, they're like,
Yeah.
what's a chemical? No, because you didn't want to search that.
Since we only have like a minute left, to just 2 comments to fill in. Securely, one of the things, if it's not being done, just problematic behaviors regarding gaming and overnight usage. So if it's dinging any time that a student is spending from 10 a.m. to 4 a.m. or something like that, to make sure that our students are sleeping, or if they're just playing video games all day when they're at home. Because addiction shows different forms, right? And that's one of the things that we got the email from the Twain parents that have talked about this before. You know, we give these students devices that are supposed to be educational purposes, not entertainment purposes. At least that's the way I look at it as a board member, to make sure that they're being used for educational intent. And then regarding the exit interviews, please give it your best shot this first time, but if you are not getting responses, please look into anonymous as well, because,
Exit our
the exits are, okay,
Exits
so,
are, stay, are not, because we want to be able to follow up with.
okay, I
And we
missed that
may-
part, sorry.
And we may, I don't know if I don't think I clearly said that either, so, but the stay, we just want to be able to follow up. If somebody has an idea, it's like, whoa,
Yeah.
that's a great idea, or something that we could easily, let's get some more information about, we want to be able to do that
Okay.
versus try to track that out. But the exits are anonymous on the way out, so that way we're getting their unfiltered rendition of why they're leaving.
Sorry if I'm coming off rushed and intense in my talk right now, but I know that we're at the end, so.
I'm gonna take us over because I really only have one comment and one quick question. And the comment is going back to talking about the webinars, mental health stuff. Like, I know that we have to normalize talking about it so people aren't scared to go to the things. But I appreciate the fact that you're going to them. You're taking the resources to the people, because in the past it's like, here's some resources, go figure out your mental health. That doesn't work, right? So going to them, I appreciate that we're providing them in a place that we're meeting them where their needs are at. So I just wanted to comment on that. My question for Allison, one of the things I think from the surveys, I think the opportunity for growth or whatever, it's just that engagement. Can you speak, what does that mean?
Yes. Are students excited to go to class? Do they feel that what they are being asked to do in class is relevant to them individually? I think one of the questions, there are 3 questions in that category at the secondary level and 2 at the elementary level. I'm excited to apply what I've learned outside of class. And one of the pushbacks that we always get from the building team members, especially at the secondary level, it sure doesn't feel good to get in the 20% favorable response, right? So the way that the research was done on the response rates, it's a 5-point scale, and percent favorable only counts the top 2. So extremely and very or something, somewhat is the middle, and our somewhat, it is a bell curve, right? And so they always like to say, well, we have this group, right, that say somewhat, and for a 17-year-old to say somewhat, that's a win. However, Panorama would say it's still more neutral, and that could be your area that you focus in on to get them up to the top 2 favorable responses, but they still look at that as that more neutral response. So Panorama's actually adjusted the way that we're able to view the data, and they're changing that on our viewing end as well, which will be ready next spring. So we can dig back into it at that point too. But the questions, I think, you know, when I was a classroom teacher, I was always wanting to know if kids had an opportunity to go in my classroom or Chase's classroom, would they pick mine? Because as a teacher, I want that, right? So I'm going to employ all the strategies to get those kids excited about coming in the door. And I think our work around HRS level 1 and level 2, really the survey data justifies why we're spending our time and energy there, because it is a need, right? I can be a content area expert, but not have engaging instructional strategies that are making my students excited to come to class.
But those things are independent, right, to a degree, because I could go to your class and I could enjoy being in your class, and I could enjoy you, and I might even be doing great in the class, and I still might say I have no idea what I'm going to do with this information.
Correct.
So that's a
Yes.
hard one to
Yes.
get a good number on, probably.
Yes.
But I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Well, this has been great. Learned a lot of things. And I appreciate the presentation. And is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, everybody.